The opinions and statements made by the guests of the Success in Practice podcast are their own, and I do not endorse or accept responsibility for their positions. Any information given by myself or the guests is educational in intention and not to be taken as medical advice. If you choose to act on the content involved in the podcast, you do so at your own risk. Welcome to the Success in Practice podcast. I'm joined today by Edward Clark. Edward currently works as an osteopath in the southern suburbs of Sydney at Kogarah. He has been practicing since 2005 after graduating from the University of Western Sydney's osteopathy program. Upon graduation, Eddie worked in Sydney for 2 years and then moved to the UK. He worked there and was an educator at the University of Oxford Brookes, where he taught in their osteopathy program. When he eventually returned to Sydney, Eddie was involved in establishing 2 clinics, one of which he still operates today. He's married with 3 children and continues to be a clinician, helping patients as an effective generalist. Eddie has served on the Board of Osteopathy Australia for 2 years as a board member with an agenda to achieve a certain outcome, and we'll discuss that later on. Eddie, thanks for being on the podcast, and welcome, mate. It's good to see you again.
Great to be here, Sammy.
Eddie, mate, I think the best value we can get out of today, speaking to you, is to discuss your time as maybe a younger clinician, especially moving to the UK and your experience there. You've been involved in 2 practices here in Sydney, and I'd like to get your view on the evolution of those and how the landscape of osteopathy in New South Wales has affected that process of building a clinic and building a business. Clinically speaking, you're a generalist who has considered doing some extra specialization. We've discussed that in some of our previous discussions, and I'd like to flesh out that scenario as to maybe why that hasn't happened or what's been in your way and what you'd like to do. And so I want to find out what's going on there. And finally, I want to get your thoughts on the time that you spent on the Board of Osteopathy Australia and understand some of the challenges of that experience. So is there anything you'd like to add to that, mate? Is there anything you want to discuss?
Spot on, Sammy. Sounds
all right,
good.
buddy. Let's get into it, because I think our viewers and the listeners would benefit a lot from your input, mate. We'll get to the osteopathy part in a minute, but first thing I want to discuss with you is you grew up in the southern suburbs of Sydney, around Peakhurst. You went to Peakhurst High School. And just to give the viewers and listeners some background, one of my current clinics is at Peakhurst, and I know the area very well. I've worked there since 1999, and it's a very diverse area. It's very working class. You know, there's no fluff about with people, and the people there have some issues in terms of health issues. But also growing up, I think there's a real sense of community, and you've really got to fight for everything that you get. And so, given that background, growing up amongst people that are kind of will just go and grab whatever they want to grab, and also they'll be very community based and help each other out. Mate, how did that affect you, and how do you think that it's helped you later on in life, and especially in your growth as a practitioner and in business?
Yeah, I think Picky High was a great high school, but a state high school. So you had, I just think of it as like it's a slice of normal Sydney. You've got every different type of religion and all these minorities, and you've got like a slice of the older Sydney as well. It gives you a good grounding especially for being osteo or being in a work. In a job where you might see the public, and it's just it helps you kind of appreciate the different kind of walks of life people that come through the door. So that grounding is good. Like it was I can't speak for any other type of high school, but it was kind of it was a rough and ready kind of high school. But yeah, if you did the work that was asked of you, you had plenty of opportunity to get decent marks and get into a career in some. Either an academic thing or in something else. I can't speak too badly of it, but I think it prepares you for our type of work, especially.
especially with communication, understanding diverse backgrounds, and
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah,
Like it really, like working in, I'm not too far away from the area now when I work, and whether you get Macedonian or Lebanese, or you get Islanders, or you get Anglos, or you get, you know, like Indigenous people coming through the door, you get, it's comfortable from the word go. You know, it's an easy thing.
well,
So
you're a graduate of the UWS program, and I guess well, I am too. And before that program came about, most of osteopathy was centered in central Sydney, the city, the inner west, and that's a different demographic than what we've had to deal with. And the expansion of osteopathy, I think, further out west and south into Sydney, I think has been one of the key reasons why we've been able to progress in Sydney.
Yep.
Do you find that that's been a welcome change? Obviously, I mean it's a different mindset. I think when you have a background that's a bit more immigrant based, and maybe where the parents of like your parents, my parents, were maybe more working class, had to struggle a little bit to make ends meet, put food on the table. I think it gives you a bit more of that drive, and I feel like that was maybe lacking a little bit in the history of osteopathy, especially being centered around the inner west and the middle of Sydney. Do you share those views, or do you have another perspective?
I think some of those, osteopathy in Sydney particularly is kind of, well, it's clustered around the higher income suburbs, especially back when we first graduated.
Yeah, correct.
Central Sydney, eastern suburbs, and we were few and far between anywhere west of, say, like Drummoyne or Balmain. So I think it does. I like, I've worked in both. I enjoy working in the suburbs a lot more. I think it's part of it is the diversity, but it's also just easier. Like the competition is less, not just for osteo, but for all types of body work. And I just think these days, if I had to give someone advice, I'd say, look, go for Sydney particularly, go in Western Sydney. You can smell the opportunity. It's there's way better opportunities out there, and your patient base is much more diverse. It's sometimes a bit more of a struggle because they aren't as affluent and they can't just afford to do the treatment program as they might need to. You might need to, you have to adapt your practice sometimes to suit what they can afford, but
but they love you when you help them, mate. They really love you when you help, and they're very loyal. It's like
they're very loyal. They're
very loyal, and they've got great networks, and they'll refer a whole bunch of people to you.
Your uncle, your auntie, the cousin, the neighbour. But if you go into those, this is just my opinion, so I don't know if it's true. But if you work in the affluent areas, I always found that I'd have patients who would have me, or they'd see their physio for their ankle sprain, and they'd see the chiropractor for, and you're just part of like a collection of people whom this person might frequent, depending. I always just say they seem to be a bit more fickle, but maybe that's just the amount of competition that's in the area or in the industry in that area.
Yeah, no, correct. I think also they just attach to you. When they find someone that's been able to help them when they haven't had that help, they really attach to you, and they just scream your name from the rooftops. Okay, mate, moving on, you decided to do osteopathy at University of Western Sydney, and it's not like we had much of a choice back then, right? That was all that was available. First of all, what made you do osteopathy, for example, as opposed to physiotherapy or whatever it was? What led you to osteopathy?
Mate, it was luck. So I fell into it really because I had a tutor who was he had been a medical professional in his career, and he would tutor high school kids, and he was my maths tutor. And it came down to the choice for me at the end of the HSC was between osteopathy, and the other thing I was looking at was like international relations or something, both at UWS. And I was kind of throwing darts at a dartboard, and him and my mother, who had seen an osteopath, it kind of influenced me. He said, "Oh, you should do this." His point was, it's an aging population. You'll never be out of work. And that's what it was. It was just, I'll pick one or the other. And then we come into osteo, and, I was 18, like you're green as field of grass, and you sink or swim with the university. You can kind of keep up, and eventually you catch up to the skill level that you need. So there wasn't any kind of grandiose story, or a kind of like patients love a grandiose story about how you found your true calling. But I've done plenty in the career since, and I think that's my version of that.
Mate, what's how long did it take you to get hooked? Once you went there, open day, first couple of weeks of university, first 6 months, first semester, how long did it take you to go, I'm all in?
It took me, I reckon it took me a while. I wasn't like hooked straight away, because for me, university was like the next thing to do. I'd worked for a roofing company a few summers, making money, and I definitely didn't want to do that. So roofing in Sydney in summer it's the pits, man. And it's kind of skid row quite people that you're working alongside. So the university was anything but. So for the first few years in the undergrad, I really enjoyed the academic pursuit of it, and like learning the foundational sciences like the anatomy and the physiology. That was all easy for me. But the practical side of it was much harder, because you wouldn't have been too much older than me, but like I was 19 or something, and then we start in clinic. I was 21 or 20. Like, you don't know.
Yeah, I was your age, mate.
Yeah.
I was straight out of high school, straight into it. So, but I was the opposite to you. I struggled with the anatomy and physiology and the scientific aspects of it, but clinically I was more comfortable. Practically speaking, hands-on speaking, I was a lot more comfortable. And so it just goes to show there's more than one pathway.
Oh yeah, and there's more than one way to find your way to it.
Yeah, and so reflecting back at that time at University of Western Sydney, how do you feel about that experience now? Like, when you think about all the, because you've been an educator yourself, you've looked at, you've taught osteopathy. Reflecting back on that experience now, can you give us some of the
I love that degree, mate. I thought that was good. The undergraduate especially, I wouldn't say a bad word about, but like it was great university experience, and we had some real like doyens of the profession kind of teaching us. That seemed to, like one of your other guests, Anne Cooper, was our, I think the first practical that I walked into was Anne Cooper. So that was, like that was just, it was a great experience. The postgraduate stuff, you started to get a little bit more, like you could feel more of the tension, not just like the work got noticeably harder. And that's when the clinic stuff started, which I really didn't take to initially. That was tough for me. And I never examined well in practical exams. The theory stuff was fine, but the prac exams, which start to get much more kind of demanding, I always didn't struggle too much, but they weren't my favorite thing. And you could tell that the course, in the postgraduate stuff, some of the experiences in the course, the complaints amongst the student body seemed to get a lot louder, bits and pieces. I remember it just kind of, I wasn't really across it, but I remember there was rumblings of discontent at such and things, and but at the end of it, we all got through and got a great qualification and entered into a brilliant career.
How did you go about tackling some of those anxieties in the practical sense? So you said that you didn't really handle practical examinations so well. How did you go about getting yourself to a point where you could actually get through it?
Learning painful lessons, mate. Painful failure lessons. Right. I think I failed one big one at the start of third or fourth year, and it was just horrifying. It was a train wreck of an exam, and it was more like, I know that the exam performance that I gave was not a reflection of my skill level. I just had a train wreck of an exam. Nervousness got in the way, and then you're second guessing what you're saying because you're trying to say what the examiner wants. I think it was Rudy Gerhardt was the examiner, who was a pretty intimidating osteopath, and it was just a train wreck. So you fail one and you have to do a reset, which was always in the university in the holidays. So you had to come back 1 week or 2 weeks into your holiday and reset this prac exam, which was a nightmare. And then you just make sure that I always found the way of doing it was, you get to a point with your learning and your study where you'd say, like, I've done so much work that I deserve this. I deserve to pass this exam. I had to convince myself. And sometimes that was just by pure, like you just overdo the work so that you can go in there and, and just convince yourself that you've done enough to get through this, nightmarish exam. Those exams, they're not the greatest exams, in my opinion, anyway. If you want to look at reliability and validity for exams, they're not much chop, but it's the way that we do what we do in higher education in osteo.
So do you think we have better better ways of examining students rather than running through the practical exam then and there?
The one big pass or fail prac exam is not well, I haven't looked at the research for a while, but I remember when I was working in the field.
Well, it's not so much the research, but do you as someone who's had some experience in education, what's a better alternative that you
have to assess regularly to try and get a more accurate screenshot of where they're at. That big one pass or fail exam is more like an elaborate hazing ritual. I got through it. So you have to get through it, right?
Well, we'll have to get Rudy on the podcast, mate, and show us. You can show us his soft side, Rudy. If you're listening, buddy, reach out and we'll get you on the podcast. Yeah. I think Joe Rogan's been trying to contact me, mate, to get on here and get on his podcast, and he keeps calling, and I've got to keep just returning his call, but I keep forgetting. I've just got too much on.
Well, he was a wonderful lecturer. He was just a horrifying examiner, mate. So,
well, Rudy, if you're listening, mate, let's get you on the podcast, and we'll show everyone how much of a cuddly softy you are, buddy. Mate, moving on, you finished the course at UWS, first 2 years in practice in Sydney. Tell us about you said that you struggled practically, maybe even through the undergraduate. And then also you had some issues in terms of being, examining and so forth from a practical point of view. Once you get out into practice, it's all practical, right? So tell us about your first 2 years. Were there any challenges there? Were there any anxieties about, am I good enough? I mean,
if I can speak candidly, I just think if I look back at myself now, I think I just sucked for about a year and a half. As a practitioner, I could do the basics. And you can do the skills that you're taught to do because you're competent enough to assess and to, decide whether or not treatment's appropriate and to write letters to doctors and to do up a treatment plan. But the rest of it, in my opinion,
the rest of it, Eddie? I just want to dig down deep a little bit, mate, because I think there's still a common problem at the moment with students. And so when you say the rest of it, you got the anatomy, the physiology, the testing. The treatment, you've got the tools, how to adjust, you know the myofascial techniques, you've got the direct and some indirect stuff. What was that was missing, do you feel? Was it the glue to kind of put it all together to understand the flow? Like, tell me, flesh it out for me.
I think it's more, for me, if I look back on it, I think what I've got now that I didn't have, I've got life experience, and and clinical experience, but also life experience. So when someone comes in to see you, who has just lost their mother, or maybe they've lost both parents in the last 2 years, and they've got a really, it's a fairly benign type of back pain, but they seem very duress. You have to ask hard questions sometimes, or voyage into their grief, and it's that kind of stuff. Maybe you can find a 22-year-old who can kind of cross those. They're hard consultations. If you want it, why are they here, and why do they,
Well, they are hard consultations. You're correct. But
so that kind of thing for me is experience. Like it's life experience stuff. And
was that the bulk of what you were seeing those in the first 2 years? I mean, look, if we break it down to just common stuff like lower back pain, hip pain, shoulders, knees, ankles.
It's maybe for me in the first few years more about knowing your worth as a practitioner and a service provider. And, I think I was under servicing with treatment for a while.
Right. Did you understand the actual physiology behind frequency, for example? Like, how often should I see somebody? I know that now you know it.
I don't think I put enough thought into that. Because I don't know if that was never taught as a, that's like if you teach that as a regimen or a protocol, we didn't get that kind of thing. It was, you're basically competent, go out there and figure it out for yourselves, which arguably is the job of a you're safe and competent in these like limited domains, you're ready to go, and the rest of it you learn, you cut your teeth with clinical work, and good mentors, right?
Yes. Well, I guess you saw some of the mentors and some of the people ahead of us do it, and I saw them do it, and I'm like,
yeah, you model.
Well,
right?
they just do it, right? And but here's the important thing: is that I think you need to know what they're doing, and they know what they're doing. They just maybe can't articulate it to you as a student, so that you can have maybe some kind of system in front of you. Just to flesh that out a little bit, especially with the example of frequency. I mean, there's physiology behind why we see somebody that's acute, twice a week, for example. Yep. The role here is that, especially, if they're acute, they're in an acute stage of healing. Your stress application can't be high. You can't go and apply a high stress to that body. And so you need low stress, but high frequency, right? And especially then you look at their general health, they're young, they're fit, and they're healthy. If they can handle that particular type of stress. And so now you've got their general health from your case history, and you've got the problem and the stage of healing that the tissue is in. That's physiology. You put those things together, and you can now understand frequency.
Yeah.
And when you understand it, especially from a physiological point of view, you don't feel uncomfortable about asking a patient to come back and see you twice a week for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And
not at all, mate.
Well, that's what gets a lot of the younger practitioners. I feel like I'm over servicing or I'm over treating. I'm like, look,
you're overly conscious of that stuff. I think a lot of younger practitioners are overly conscious of that.
They are overly conscious, and I just don't think that's been taught. And I don't think that was even taught to us. So it was something that was assumed that you'd pick up as you go along. But there is physiology behind what we call treatment variables. How hard do you press on a patient? How much stress do you apply?
Yeah.
And what are the reasons for that? How much frequency do you use to treat? What kind of intensity do you treat with? What kind of dosage do you treat with? They're all treatment variables that need to be extrapolated, and unfortunately they're not really taught. They're just assumed like people would know them when they graduate.
I think when I was first practicing, the big one that I missed, in addition, another way to come at that, how would you like pace your treatment intervals initially, especially with acute pain, is trying to gauge how much distress the person is in. A lot of people come in acute pain, they're quite distressed about it.
Yep.
Especially backs, and your job is like you've got to provide your treatment, but you're also managing their distress. And reassuring
and you can't
them
add more distress. You're not going to lay them there for half an hour and overcook them.
Yeah, and if you sense that they're in the slightest way distressed, you're not really doing your job. If you say, I'll see you next Tuesday, let's see you in 2 days' time, or 3 days' time, like at a maximum, if they're distressed. Like some people come in and they've done their back and it's bad and they're crippled over like this and they're laughing, right? It's not their first rodeo. They might not be distressed. Like their pain is bad. They can't function.
But they're still optimistic.
So you're not really managing the stress with that person. You might be managing the physiology more. You're still going to probably see them 2 or 3 days.
Yep.
But the distressed people, don't miss that one. They really need you in a couple of days' time, right?
Yeah.
So
good. So I like to flesh that out with the guests that I have on the podcast, because I think especially a lot of the experienced practitioners, they know what they're doing, but we don't actually flesh it out and actually say this is the physiology behind it. And if we tell the students what the physiology behind it is, they're going to be more comfortable actually recommending it to their patients.
Yeah, I find that with acute pain, as I've gotten older, I'm more conservative with my physical therapy on the first session or the second session. Like you're doing all the other stuff, you're assessing, reassuring, or you might be.
And by conservative, you mean you do less.
The first time,
less
like
is
the
more.
First time, less is more the first time or the second time. Sometimes even if they want you to go a bit harder, I'll say to them, look, listen, you got to trust me here because this is not my first time seeing this. The last thing I need for you is go out of here and have worse pain for the next 24 or 48 hours. Let's just do this and that. I think that's an interesting argument to get into, because I know there are practitioners who will go the other way from me. So it's your duty to work the segment or to do the adjustment or whatever.
Well, you can do the adjustment. I mean, HVLA itself it's actually a low stress if it's done correctly. It's a low stress technique. So you get in, you do the work, you get out. It's over in about 3 seconds,
Oh,
right?
especially some of them, if you can do it without too much talk or
Yeah,
whatever.
That's right. So there, but I mean, what you just mentioned is that, again, there's physiology behind that, and we're really managing inflammation in the first few weeks of an injury. And if a patient wants you to go harder, you just say, look, if I go harder, you're going to feel good in about 20 minutes, and you're going to feel bad in about an hour. And
I think that's the other one that I missed for the first couple of years is really picking up on the patient expectations. You know, not missing out on, you don't want a little bit more pressure here, do you? This is, you know, like that's a nuanced kind of skill that takes a while to catch up.
You got to manage expectations.
Yeah, people come in and if you don't, you know, it's not always meeting expectations.
Or managing expectations.
Managing expectations is the best way.
Yeah.
But sussing out if some of them will come in and they don't feel like they've had a treatment unless you have dead set almost just, you know, tortured them with your elbow for 25 minutes. And some of them, you know, are wincing at finger touch pressure, you know. So that's a kind of like you just got to be alive for that one.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to take a quick moment to thank everyone for watching and listening to the podcast. If you have received value from this episode, the kindest thing you can do for me is to like, share, follow, and subscribe to the channel on whichever platform that you are listening on. If any of the conversations have resonated with you and you feel that I can help elevate your practice, you can find me at successinpractice.net. That is, the Success in Practice program can be found at successinpractice.net. The Success in Practice program is the signature program that takes a practitioner who may be struggling with retaining patients. They may not be certain about building effective treatment strategies, and they may feel somewhat anxious and doubtful about what they are going to do with a patient. And they are not really accelerating in the real world of private practice. It takes this practitioner and it turns their careers right around to the point where the patients have an effective diagnosis and a real treatment plan that they can take home. Patients are happy to book in multiple sessions with you, and they are confident about your abilities. And more importantly, you now have direction and are confident about your own abilities. The program streamlines how you operate as a practitioner. Guys, you should have been taught this at university, but you weren't. You may have been practicing for the last few years thinking there has to be a better way. There has to be a more effective way of engaging with patients and getting them results. Well, there is. And this is what the program delivers. Go to successinpractice.net and check out the options available to you. See where I can help you easily grow your patient list and finally earn the rewarding income that you deserve. For all the information on how you can reach me personally, check out the show notes. Also in the show notes, you'll find a link to the chat transcripts from these podcasts. These are valuable and a wealth of information. I really hope that you're enjoying the podcast. Guys, leave a comment if there's any questions on this episode. And please, don't forget to like, share, follow, and subscribe to the channel. Now, back to the show. Right. So your first 2 years in practice, you felt like for 18 of those months you weren't that comfortable, and you could have done a lot better.
No, I think it's just green, and you're imitating other practitioners a lot.
Right. Yeah. So what made you pack your bags, mate, and head off to the UK after that?
I think we were always going to do that. We had some friends who were already over there. And
we as in you and your missus, you and your wife?
My wife, who was, I think she had already graduated uni, and so she was working, and we were just waiting for the 5-year course to finish. So I wanted to work for a couple of years first, just to gain some experience and not hit, you know, like I knew you had to go and sit the examination process over there as well. So God knows you don't want to do that first thing out of university. So go and earn some money for a while and then go and move over to England. I had a visa that was, pretty good in England. I could work indefinitely as well. So that was just wanted to kind of make sure I got some life experience from that. So that was the attraction.
Okay. All right. And what were the main challenges for you over there? How did you feel as a young practitioner going to practice in maybe an environment that was a little bit different than what we were trained in?
First of all, it was exciting. It was like it's a career. We had a profession. I knew that there was a strong culture of osteo in England, like quite slightly. It's quite different to ours, but at the time it seemed similar but different. And so that was the kind of, well, why not? you know, I've done this work, I've got this qualification, go over there and I know I'm good enough to do the process and get in there. And like you go into this just like, yeah, I'll just do what needs to be done. And it's a naive approach. And when you're halfway through kind of the process, you get in there, you realize this is just like an ordeal to try and get your qualifications recognized.
See, mate, that comes back to Peakhurst High School, I think. That attitude, right?
Yeah.
I'll just tell us a little story. I was driving to a mate's house back where I grew up in the western suburbs here in Sydney, and I was in the car with my wife and my kids, and there were these two young boys, would have been about 9, 10 years old, and one of them was on a quad bike without a helmet on. The other bloke was on a little two-wheeler, you know, and they one of them's doing a wheelie and the other bloke, and they're no helmets. They're just going around on the streets, and my wife's just looking at them, going, "Oh my God, just the anxiety!" And you know, they don't have helmets on, and they're gonna.
Safety, yeah.
And I said to her, I said, "Look, if these young boys make it through high school, they're going to eat your kids alive."
Yeah. Yeah.
And she said, "What do you mean?" I said, "They're just going to eat your kids alive. You know, your kids are all wrapped up in cotton wool. If these boys make it out of high school, they're going to do very, very well in life."
Yeah, they're
You know,
exposed
and
to
then
a lot
that's what
more.
happened to you, mate. You went to the UK. It was a new place, and you just said, "Mate, get on with it." You know, you know, it wasn't like, "Oh my God, you know, what am I going to do and how am I going to survive?" You just get on with it.
Yeah, yeah. You just throw yourself into the mixer and learn some more painful lessons, mate. So
Yeah, right. And so, whilst you were there, you took up a teaching gig at Oxford Brookes. What were you doing there, and how did you feel that you navigated that experience? What was your role there?
So the interesting thing, and I don't know, your audience, if there's more new grads there, that process came out of the getting your qualifications recognised. Now, it was a while ago now, so they might have changed the process, but you had to submit I forget what they called it, a portfolio. You had to submit a portfolio of your experience, and it was this 14-page thing. I think that ended up being like almost as many words as my research thesis.
Right.
So you submit this thing, you know, like its components and parts of it. And then once they approve that, you paid for it as well. They pass that, and then you pay a couple of grand.
They need your money.
And now you qualify for a practical exam. So you can come to this random place that was actually the BSO. They had a room in the BSO in summer, and you can just walk into and like the equivalent of a Viva exam with people you've never met before. So you go and sit this bloody exam, and it was just a nightmare. So the first one of those, like, and this is speaking candidly, the first one of those, again, I did well on one patient, and I got trapped on the next patient in a discussion with someone about Fryet's spinal mechanics, which I had not thought about since
you hadn't looked at
year.
since year 2, really.
I hadn't thought about it since third year. I got trapped in this discussion with this one man. We had a panel of 3 practitioners. This one guy just wouldn't let me rest on Fryet's motion of, I think I'd said this, the sacrum seemed to be like side bent left, and he just wouldn't let me go about what L4, L5 was doing and which way it was rotating. And I was just like, I could have just said, that's not my model. I don't subscribe to Fryet's laws of motions. What I'm talking about is he's got back pain, it's this and that. I should have just said, I'm not going to engage. But again, that practical exam, you play their game. So I flunked that first prac exam based on, I think, you know, they gave you no feedback. So I think it was based on that. So I had to reset this bloody exam, and I stuck over there without an opportunity to work for a few weeks. It was just like, oh, this is a nightmare. I'm going to go back through this thing, and reset it the second time. And the second time, the moderator of the exam offered me a job at the university. So it's this kind of experience. This exam is bullshit. Excuse my language.
It's all right.
It's necessary, but it's the results from it are so all over the place. And the moderator was working at a university, and he was looking for people with a master's degree, because the way that their education was structured at the time, they were spitting out graduates with bachelors but no masters. And the idea is, in university, if you're going to teach people to a bachelor's level, you should have a master's, and if you're going to teach people to a master's level, you should have a PhD. So the Australian graduate's pretty attractive. So I just got a gig straight away doing hourly paid clinic supervision and some basic lecturing on, I don't know, osteo techniques, first year or something like that, and I was the kind of assistant guy. But it was 32 quid an hour compared to working, you know, around the corner for, I don't know, at the time, you know, people were getting paid like half of that. I just had to commute to Oxford and back, which to me seemed like a great adventure. So
Well, I think also when you're in private practice and you get to treat patients, it's great, and you learn from that experience. But sometimes it doesn't afford you the time to actually think, you know, whilst you're doing. But teaching itself is, you know, if you're teaching students, you really get a chance to just sit there and flesh out your thoughts whilst you're actually teaching. So I think that's a great experience.
The ivory towers.
Yeah, right, mate. Look, you spent a few years over in the UK, and then you came back to Sydney, and you went into private practice for yourself. You had some business partners. Tell us about the major challenges in establishing those practices. What were some of the roadblocks? What were some of the challenges? And and talk to us about that.
Well, like starting a practice is hard, as you would probably know. So you start out and you get to, in my experience, you get to a level as a solo practitioner, something that you built from your, you know, from the base level yourself. And I think we were running with like a part-time reception, and you know, it was all a bit, you know, like you know, it's a bit simple, a bit too unprofessional. So I reached out to a friend of mine, a colleague, George Spruikos, and said, look, listen, if we push these two, we're similar locations, push it together, we can get a professional outfit going. And you know, it was a way to accelerate the practice up to a level where you had full-time assistant, you know, cover and everything much faster, which is the real attraction, I think, of partnerships, is you can kind of quite quickly, you can share the risk and the stress of starting a business, and you know, like all the sleepless nights and that, you've got someone to bounce ideas off. There's real attraction there in the early days, absolutely.
Well, I know George. George is a good guy, and I think that would have been a good experience. And I guess if you set it all up from the start, and you understand each other's roles. I mean, obviously as clinicians, you're not going to get involved in what each other are doing, but I think you also have to have some similar values in terms of clinical application. But then if you lay out each other's roles properly, you know, Eddie, you look after the marketing and the rostering and XYZ, and George, you look after this and that, and then you have a few meetings, you know, throughout the year to make sure that everyone's on track, and you don't get involved and micromanage each other's business. I think it could work well.
But you need that stuff, and like the first time you go into those things, what you need to discuss beforehand is completely opaque. You don't really know, like all of the scenarios that you might run into. People get sick, or people want to stop, or people want to quit, or all those things that can happen. You probably have, you know, you need to have agreed beforehand on all of these things. And it's, you know, there's a reason why lawyers exist, because that's kind of they help with things like that. It's, you know, but you can just go into it quite blind and optimistic, which is what George and I did. And we're still friends to this day. It's just, you know, you ride this rough road together, and you have your ups and downs. So
it's good to have an exit plan as well, right?
That is the essential thing.
You put an exit plan in place just in case things go sour, and you have that discussion.
They don't last forever.
Yeah.
Ever, you know, like they always end at one stage. So you need to kind of discuss how it's going to end at the start, which is, you know, you don't think of that at all. Right?
No, mate. All right. So you build up a couple of practices. You still own and operate one of those practices. At the moment, what are some of the challenges that you're facing right now in terms of being able to grow your clinic, at least to the point where you can have like a nice family of therapists there? And obviously, we're talking about osteopaths. You know, I know you, and I've known you for a while, and we love osteopathy, and we want to see osteopaths grow.
Yeah.
And so, what's been the biggest challenge for you in terms of, you know, going to work, having a good little team of maybe 2 or 3, 4 osteopaths there? You know, you can kind of bounce things off each other. The place is just lovely to work at. You know, flesh that out for me. What's been the biggest challenge for you?
Team management is all about recruitment, isn't it, really? It's the personnel and recruitment. Like if you get the right people in place, that stuff is all easier. Recruitment for osteo in Sydney is always the issue.
Yeah.
It has been. We could have used a female osteo for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years.
Yeah. 5-15.
And in the absence of that, we fill the hole with whatever shoe. I'll mix the metaphor, but you know, like you just fill the space in the clinic with what you can find. So we've ended up with a clinic which is very multidisciplinary. And that takes up most of my time. I said to someone jokingly the other day, I'm not in the business of osteopathy at the moment. I'm in the business of selling rooms to health professionals and running services, which is a lot of the practice that I've got at the moment. And I work 4 days a week with patients. I would rather work more, but that's the load of the business and the business manager as it is. There's always levels to this. We may get to more outsourcing so that I can do more osteo work. That's the next goal for me.
You graduated in 2005, and the UWS course continued, I think, till 2010. And so for about 5 years there, you had some students coming out. Was that an easier time than what we're currently going through right now?
Oh, for sure. As you know, you'll get people coming looking for jobs in Sydney, but they're not Sydney people. Not that, they're not born and bred here. They don't have family and friends and networks and all those things that'll help people into clinical work like ours. They're just and there's not enough of them. So a course here would be just a dream.
Right.
But we just got to recognise the reality of that and be patient.
We'll discuss that later on today. And so let's wind back a little to the UWS program and your experience with that. You discussed earlier some of the positives and negatives there. What could have been done better there to maybe keep the course going?
So
because you've sorry to cut you off, but you've had some experience in maybe the background and understanding what some of the complaints were, because you spent some time as a board member on Osteopathy Australia's board, where your main mission at that time was to actually set up a course. And so you spoke to different stakeholders, and what was the feedback? Why?
So let me give the background to that, because when I worked in England and I worked on the course over there, and I gradually ended up with a full-time academic role and eventually an administrative role with the course. And I worked there for 2 or 3 years till my wife got sick of England and wanted to move home. I saw the other side of the course. So you see the back end of it and the administrative side and the student management and all of those things, and the problems and the spot fires and the crises that pop up and the runctions with the university management team and all of this stuff. And you see this kind of at times it's it's rough and it's tough for a course like osteo to exist in that thing, because we don't have a lot of legitimacy sometimes in the eyes of the other allied, or at least in terms of medicine or something like that. Often in terms of universities, we're fine because they're doing nursing or architecture or other degrees, which are just, it's a university degree. So it gave me a lot of perspective on what it must have been like at UWS for the people who were running that course. And knowing that it had shut down, seeing what I saw at Brooks, I realized things must have been bad enough in that course to make that decision. At least, it's not a happy, positive, profitable course that you willfully just shut down, right? Maybe, I don't think so. So knowing that, when I came back to Australia and having the higher education experience and the qualification, I did a qualification over there in teaching and higher education. You come back maybe a little optimistic or maybe a little naive. I had 2 things that I had kind of thought, why don't we fix this? One was, why don't we have a reciprocal arrangement with England for osteopaths to move back and forth? Why do you have to put up these road barriers and you have to do our exams and you have to do our exams and we're going to put you through this expensive and time-consuming process? Because that seems just silly to me. And it exists in some other professions where you can kind of you have a reciprocal recognition of their qualifications. And the other one was, why isn't there a course in Sydney that's producing osteopaths? They just seem like no-brainers, right? And it's they
are no-brainers, mate.
They are no-brainers.
It's the largest market in the country. Sydney's the largest market in the country for everything, really. And not to have a course in Sydney is really to our shame. It's a shame,
detriment, man.
It's a detriment to the profession. If you want, I mean, we've seen what's happened in Melbourne, how osteopaths in Melbourne are now working with football clubs and in aged care, and They're just going into all these different avenues, and that happens off the back of volume.
Yeah.
It's not. We think it's lobbying and it's hard work, and it's not. When you have enough osteopaths where they themselves are looking into these avenues of other work,
Yeah, and you get
they open up. That's right. They open up
high quality individuals who are already moving in that direction, who get an osteopathy degree and take that and push the whole career, the profession further in one domain.
Yeah, we need volume. We need
We need volume, but it's also you have to recognise the extra qualifications that they have done. The special interest groups that they've set up are a good move in the right direction as well for osteo. So they're setting up towards a level of specialisation, which will help. That's administrative stuff that has to be done, again, out of universities. So, yeah.
Well, I think universities always offer a pathway for specialisation. I mean, you want to do a strength and conditioning course, you want to do a geriatric course, you want to do something to specialise. Pain management. There's nothing wrong with that.
Sports injury specialisation.
And so, I think that's always a good thing. But there's no point having specialisation if you don't have the actual students coming out of the program that is actually producing osteopaths.
Yeah.
And so, it should be, look, my opinion's been pretty clear in the past on this. It needs to be at the forefront of whatever
high priority
for our professional association and our stakeholders, not just the professional association, the OBA, the Osteopathy Board of Australia. Everyone has to kind of collectively come together and say, we have a single aim of getting a course up and running in Sydney, and we're not going to, there needs to be like a rabid dog. We're not going to accept no for an answer.
Priority number one. I still agree. I think that's important. I know lobbying is important, but seems like to me the rest of the profession, apart from the availability of graduates for growth into emerging parts of Australia, that should be probably number one priority.
Well, business owners are really, they should be heading this, because they should be the one that's speaking up the loudest, because it's really affecting them. It's a bottleneck, right? We've got patients. People don't believe me when I say, if you come from Melbourne or Lismore and you work in Sydney, you're going to be on $1,500 to $2,000 a week pretty quickly.
Straight away,
you'll do well very quickly, and so we need the volume out here. Hello everyone, just a quick break to give you some information on where to best find me. The first place is the private Facebook group called the Successful Practitioner Pathway. I've set up this private group as a place where practitioners can go and get tips and advice on how to best accelerate their practice and improve their clinical practice skills. The second place to find me is at successinpractice.net. That is where the Success in Practice signature program is housed. You can find more information about me and how I can best help you achieve success in your practice. So the two best places, the private Facebook group, the Successful Practitioner Pathway, and successinpractice.net. I will link to both those places in the show notes. So for more information, please see the show notes. Now, enjoy, and back to the show. And I just don't, whether it is a massive priority, maybe it is, it's not being communicated, right?
So when I went,
tell me, sorry, come off, but tell me about your time.
Well, that was my experience going on the board, was because that was like that feeling was like, why isn't this happening? So I managed to, with Anne's help, I got myself elected as the New South Wales representative on the board for osteo in Australia.
I remember having a chat to you. I think we were doing some course on that.
Yeah, they were still vaccines. Australian Osteopathic Association.
That's right. Stage. And we sat down
and we did the vaccination.
That's right.
Course.
That's right. And we were having a beer, me and you, and you said to me, Sammy, I'm on the board because I'm single-mindedly have a mission to re-establish a course in Sydney. And if I don't do that, that's all I'm here to do. And I just want to make this public for everyone. That didn't happen, and to his credit, Eddie, after 2 years, said I couldn't get this through, or for whatever reason, not me, not Eddie, but for whatever reasons were laid out in front of him, it couldn't happen. And he packed his bag and went back to clinical practice and was successful there. And so I put that out to everybody to have that kind of attitude. Like, state what your mission is as somebody who's being elected to the board, and fulfill that mission or move on.
Yeah, I think that's a big point. I think that's
because we don't need people that are going to just come up with new ideas that really isn't the main priority for osteopaths in New South Wales. We don't need. Look, I come on, I want to get a course up and running, but hey, I've been here for a couple of years and we couldn't get it done, and so I'm going to just think up of something else to do. Tell us what your priority is. Tell us, if you're running for the board position, tell us what your priorities are as a board member. Tell us what you want to achieve, and if you don't achieve those, then move on for someone else to come on board and have a crack.
Yeah, and I think that there's pluses and minuses to the way they run the board with the elections coming from osteos and every 2-year terms. I think it's necessary, obviously, but I think you do tend to have a tendency for the direction of the organisation to come and go and to almost reinvent the wheel sometimes. My experience with Osteo, I think they were AOA at that stage, but now Osteo Australia, was we tried, and the organisation tried very hard. So we set up a committee which had eminent osteopaths on it. Like, everyone got behind this because it's a no-brainer. Everyone agrees. And we had Nick Lucas and Louise Adams and myself, and I think it was maybe Stefan, who has some education experience and qualifications as well. I might be wrong on that. But the 4 of us sat on this committee and we drafted a letter, and then we went out and sent this letter to something silly. It was like, it was all of the universities within the Sydney Basin. And we got dribs and drabs back. We got a couple of replies. Most of it was just fall on deaf ears type stuff. A couple of letters that were, thanks, but no thanks at the moment for whatever reason. There just wasn't any reception to it. Now, at the stage, I think we'd worked on this for about 2 years with what are we going to do? Who's on the committee? We'll set up the committee. What's the committee's objective? What's the, it takes a long time to do this because you meet every 3 or 4 months or 6 months or something, and there's other stuff that's going on. And so when that happened, I think the energy in the committee was a bit, well, we've tried, we're out of ideas. I don't know, in hindsight, I think a lot of our ability as a profession is probably in interpersonal networking. Like, how many people out there see an osteopath? How many people would see a vice chancellor as a patient? Like, there are other ways that we probably could have pushed, at least in terms of getting access to people who might be able to sway. That letter that we got back was probably just a proviso written up by an assistant or a secretary. It's like, whether we got in front of the right people, I don't know. But at the stage, it was like, oh God, what else do we do? How do we try? Who do we speak to?
At the time,
it felt like a closed door.
Yeah, at the time, I mean, we care about Louise Adam. She's fantastic. We care about Nick Lucas, and we cared about him when he was an osteopath. We still care about him. He'll be on the podcast soon, by the way. But and he was a fantastic lecturer and a very an advocate, obviously, for us at that time. Who we care about you, mate. You're a fantastic osteopath, but unfortunately, universities don't know who all of you were. And there's a letter there, and why would they even consider this? And so it begs the question, as in, I think you just have to reverse engineer what you're trying to achieve. If you're trying to achieve a course, you figure out what the course asks or what the universities want in that course, and you go and give it to them.
Yeah, and you keep trying and find the right people.
And you keep trying, and you keep trying. That's right.
Also, there was a feeling amongst the board, the association, and I don't think this was wrong, that the profession was, I don't know what the polite way to say this was, we weren't popular. There was a time where there was chiropractic.
There was a stench.
Yeah, we were on the nose. It was kind of a blowover from what chiropractic. It was the first real pushback on chiro because of a couple of books in the UK, and the Chiro Associated sued a journalist for libel. And I think we were tarred with this. They're alternative, wishy-washy. They're not scientific. They don't belong. This is just my feeling of, like, the time the political, the zeitgeist was a bit against osteopathy. Now, I would guess that has changed because it will change eventually, because we're out there doing what is essentially like a very useful healthcare service out in, like private practice, and it doesn't cost the government very much compared to what it costs them in emergency wards or, like lots of different things.
Well, mate, if governments didn't like us, they would have shut us down through COVID, and they asked us to stay open. They obviously know the value that we give to the healthcare system, and so, mate, I think also what you said earlier about having that stench around, and that I agree that would have been around, but you got to push through that.
I don't think it's. I think these days, if you look at,
that's not around anymore. But
no, I think there's people were initially focusing this kind of microscope of like evidence-based practice just on osteo or chiro or naturopathy. It's like, well, why don't you have a look at, I don't know, ACL surgery, or why don't you have a look at meniscus surgery, or why don't you have a look at, like, if you live in a glass house, maybe don't, like it's, you can apply that to so many different types of medicines or therapies these days. We're all doing what is essentially like a patient-based service, and I just think it'd be interesting to see what the results of that would be if we tried that again, and maybe tried it with a little bit more nous, and see who we know amongst the network of people who might be an advocate of osteopathy within hallowed halls.
There's plenty there in terms of connection. I just think you need to have a mindset of not accepting. I mean, if we took no for an answer every single time we came up against an objection in business, we wouldn't have a business.
No.
If I took no for an answer, I probably wouldn't have been married by now. That's the way it is, right?
Yeah.
And so you've got to push through a lot of those no's, because and you need to know your worth. You mentioned it earlier about a practitioner knowing their worth, and when they know their worth, they'll push through and they'll actually start to become good at what they do. I think we need to know our worth, and we need to have people in charge who are osteopaths that know our worth, right? And so that's why I'm putting it out there. I'd love to have all the board members on this podcast, and I'd love to chat to everybody. I think it's an open.
It would be very useful to know.
Yeah, I think we need to have some open discussions with people. We need to get their true thoughts. We don't need political kind of spin on things, and hearing things like, well, we've got some challenges ahead of us. Yes, we know we have challenges ahead of us.
We've always got challenges.
We've always got challenges ahead of us. We want to know what's actually happening. What is, maybe there's a lot happening, but I don't know it. I mean, I'm pretty close to all the groups on Facebook, and I look at all the notifications. I read all the emails, and I'd like to know more about what's happening.
Yeah, I think that's one of the challenges for the association, having a rolling membership on that board, is that there's a lack of continuity, and I think there's some degree of kind of reinventing the wheel or going back and forward on certain objectives, and maybe that's the way with all boards, but maybe especially.
Well, we've had some continuity there. I mean, the CEO's been there for almost 20 years.
20 years,
almost. I mean, since I could remember being a practitioner.
Yeah.
And so there's been good continuity there, and so
he would know. He's an exceptional source of what the board has done before, but essentially he works for the board. So,
well, essentially, yes, that's correct. But like I said, we have to take responsibility as a profession. We're the osteopaths. The board members are the osteopaths. We have to kind of take responsibility, and if we need to instruct the executive to do something, then we need to instruct the executive to do something, and not accept excuses for an answer. That's my particular opinion. You may not share that, Eddie, but and you've had the experience that I haven't.
No, I think that's essentially the job of the association, is to represent like the interests of the profession. But it may come to pass that the way that the course, because we will get a course in Sydney again, it may just come from a different route. So it may just come from some other way. I'm sure they'll recognise as a market.
There has to be a way. The way that they're doing two different separate models at RMIT and Victoria University. What the Victoria University model is, I think, is from what I understand, a block model where they get taught in blocks, and the RMIT is the traditional semester model. And so there's two separate kind of things running there, and there's got to be a way that we can take those and and kind of get them down here in Sydney and recreate it.
Yeah.
Now, and you know, I'm not putting, you can't kind of put the sole blame on the association too, because
No, of course not.
But because there are other stakeholders involved that need to step up as well. And but the thing about the association is it's the connecting point between osteopaths and the profession. You know, I can't communicate with the board. I mean, maybe I can, but it's like the board's there to oversee regulation. They're not there to listen to me about my problems in practice. Whereas the association is there to listen to me as a member. And so they should really reflect that. And I guess what we're saying out here in Sydney is we're hurting. We're hurting a lot. And at the very least, we need some communication in terms of what's happening, what's going on, and what we're doing about getting a course up and running.
It's in everyone's interest. It's in their interest as well. More members. Another course means more members, which means
100%.
More revenue. So
no, I don't think that I don't think that they would ever say no to a course in Sydney.
No. It's a complex problem, and it's not an easy fix, and that's my experience as well. It's just, it would be good.
And this I think therein lies the problem. It's not an easy fix, and we don't want it swept under the rug, you know, because it seems like the osteo landscape has shifted to Melbourne, and everything's hunky dory down there.
You have the Gold Coast as well, but there's more in the Gold Coast seem to be producing. So
that's right, and the Gold Coast. So
there is progress.
Yeah. Mate, I think we've kind of fleshed that out quite a bit. Now that you're on your own in terms of practice and operating your own clinical practice, what's the future hold for you? Where do you want to go? I know that you've been wanting to do some extra study or extra courses. Tell us what you'd like to do in the future.
I really would, Sammy. I'd like to kind of specialize is not the right word, but like go in a particular direction with my practice and add like a special interest or work with a specific group of patients. But I don't know about you. I've got no time. As a rule, that's my problem. I have no time.
Time is
the key thing. Like if you've got a family like yourself and me, and you are actively involved in your family, I go to work, I do family stuff and kids stuff. I go to work, I do family stuff and kids stuff. So the idea of going to university or doing like an online course for 6 months on a Sunday, it's not going to pass I will at some stage, but not in the next 8 years, I think.
Well, mate, the good thing is in clinical practice, you're doing a lot of learning.
Yeah.
You don't really think about it that way, right? But you're doing a whole bunch of learning in clinical practice. And I get where you're coming from. Look, I haven't done a course that takes on any kind of specialization probably in the last 13, 14 years. Now, in saying that, time has been a big factor. But also, I think that when you apply osteopathic principles across the board, it gets you not just over the line, it gets you way over the line and gets you very good at something very quickly. And so other than going to learn more techniques and more, specific anatomy, I guess, when you're thinking about, say, anatomy of different dysfunctions, I don't feel like there's anything out there that really tickles what I want to do.
Yeah, it doesn't really dovetail well with practice. But some of the special interest groups, I'm sure, are working on small things like that. But it doesn't. What I find, and this is probably speaking to your last questions, what I'm interested in at the moment is going and talking to other osteopaths who have the similar pressure load like I do. That's what I'm interested in. So I was talking to you before the podcast started about maybe coming out and having a look at how you run your operation and trying to get some inspiration about how you're running that practice. That's my practice at the moment is growing, and it's like initially the weight of working for that practice, sometimes it's overwhelming. Making sure that you know what you have to know everyone's problem in there as the clinic owner, the principal. And if you're not in a good space, you're kind of hiding from those problems. So I find going and chatting to someone like you, or I recently went and had lunch with Kevin Finnan, chatting to him about like how he manages the kind of the storm of the practice and how he runs his operation. I'm going to speak to another guy that I know runs a business that's very similar. That's what I'm doing at the moment. and just taking inspiration from that and just bringing it back to my own practice, because I realized with the family and the 3 kids and the practice at the moment, that's where my passion is run that practice. I'm passionate about osteo, but at the moment, that's my baby, running that practice and making that the best version of itself, so that when you walk into that business, you think, oh, this place is special and these people are, exceptional. And, that's how
first, mate, I think if you just let the values and principles of osteopathy kind of permeate through your practice, and you can apply those to other modalities, I know of some surgeons that practice osteopathically and they don't even know it, right? And so if you allow those principles to permeate, that's the first thing. That's really the basis of it. If you allow those values and principles to permeate through your practice, it starts you off being very, very happy. Now, there are other things to discuss, obviously, and I'll catch up with you privately and we'll have a beer over that. And then maybe once we have that beer, we can maybe do another podcast about it and tell people what we discussed. But it's a very rare thing to see a practitioner business person hybrid. I was very fortunate to have that experience with John Abdullah when I was with him. He was the only osteopath that I ever knew that saw the volume of patients that he saw and ran a business very, very well.
Oh, it was great operations. I mean, I don't know if you remember, I worked there for a period of time as well, doing the assistant job. So
so we saw we saw that kind of happen. And I know of a lot of osteopaths who are now more interested in business, and I know a lot of osteopaths who are great clinicians. I don't know of many that do both very well.
It's a funny,
it's a tough one.
Start out when you first practice and your focus is entirely about trying to be the best version of the osteopathic practitioner, and somewhere along the line, it's not even apparent where that is. It becomes a morph into, I need to have the practice operating at a level, where it supports the practitioners, and then all of a sudden you're interested in business, and you can't lose focus on, like, I really enjoy my time in the room with patients. It's still my favorite part of my week. But I do find it has its drawbacks, and it's sometimes very draining as well. So I suppose maybe I should appreciate the mix more between the two of them, but
yeah, I think also going back to our discussion on recruitment, if we had a steady stream of people coming through, we'd just let the cream rise to the top. And you wouldn't worry as much, like you wouldn't invest as much into making sure a practitioner, swam, because, if you've got 5 people lined up to take that position, you just go, hey, look, we're going to give you an opportunity here. And it's up to you to take it. But now it's different. Now it's like, it's not just an opportunity. Look, we're going to cling on to you. You're telling someone, we're going to really cling on to you and make sure. And it's not really
the issues. And that's, like, part of that's, I struggle with that to this day. It's like, when do you make the point when you decide where, okay, it's not working? It's one of the hardest parts of the job, I think, man. Because the mentoring it's important to mentor people, and you need to give them every chance.
You do. It'll be a much easier thing though if we had the volume there to make those decisions. We just don't have now. I mean, we don't have the option now. You've got to hold the hand through it. Mate, I think that's a good way a good point to wrap up what we've been discussing. Eddie, mate, always a pleasure, and talking to you now, mate, I regret not doing this more often. And so we will be back for round 2 on the podcast with Eddie. I think this has been surprisingly a very open and honest, not that we've never been open and honest with each other, but I think for the viewers, there's been a lot of gold nuggets in there that have come out. And both of us are very, I think, forthcoming with the information. So, Eddie, thank you so much
Sammy,
for your time. I know you're a busy man, and I'll catch you on episode number 2. But I'll catch up with you this week as well, and we'll have a beer and have a chat.